Hello, my name is Hamlet Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories and the intimate stories and the studio practices of some of the people who help shape the creative landscape of our city. These unedited interviews are all recorded at the Memphis Listening Lab, an archival gem located in the majestic Crosstown Concourse in beautiful Midtown Memphis. Now, the website for Memphis Material was designed by the wonderful Brian Dixon. Today's interview is part 2 of 3 interviews that I did with the amazing Brittney Boyd Bullock. This interview was recorded on January 29th, 2025. We don't really have sponsors, but if we did, today's episode would be sponsored by Community. It is obviously a powerful driver for Brittney and all of the things that Brittney does, and for me as well. And so enjoy the episode. Again, today's episode is part 2 of 3 interviews that we did with the amazing Brittney Boyd Bullock. This one was recorded on January 29th, 2025. Okay, so end of college. Give me the what we have now come to refer to as the BBB timestamp. What's the timestamp?
End of college, 2013. I graduated May of 2013, and it was. I don't remember if I mentioned the kind of work that I was making, but I in my thesis show, I was laboriously making these like paper beads that I was like cutting strips of paper from magazines, particularly beauty magazines, and I was meticulously rolling them one by one, and then I would string them together to make this like bead strand or garland. And then I was also in the wood shop cutting these very small, meticulous, like angular shapes that I would then paint and collage on top and create like this 2D, 3-dimensional wearable accessory. So in my senior show, I had that body of work where I had the beaded accessory piece, I had the wood accessory piece, and then I also accompanied that with a medicine cabinet. And I was making these pills out of like glitter and plaster that would then go into these medicine bottles, right? And the idea at that point was that I was, commenting on the notion of beauty and what that meant for me in my life. But also, too, I had done like a public, I don't even want to call it a performance piece because it's like, for real, like, was it? But I had done one of my critiques in college where I had set up this wall full of magazines and beauty magazines, and I had a mirror in the center, and I was putting on my makeup while doing critique. But the way I put the makeup on was like, it was everywhere. It was like not cute at all. And then I went throughout the rest of the day with my face that way. And like, I went to an artist talk, I went to a show, I did all the things with, so I was really interested in this idea of consumerism, beauty, what does that mean for the Black body, right? That kind of thing. But as I reflect on my journey, what I'm more even like interested in and or like didn't quite know just then was how meticulous and repetitive I wanted to work. Like, it was a huge desire of mine. Like, I would much rather spend a week creating the same small thing over and over again to get to something versus getting to it quicker in a different kind of way.
Now, in our grown-up brains, we have a certain understanding of why we do this.
Sure.
The kind of meticulous work.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, in terms of thinking about your younger artist self, how did that fit in, or how did you align with that?
Like during that time or even younger?
Yeah.
Because I think I have really two examples of that. So even younger, right? So like middle school, I remember you asking me like when was the first time or that I realized I was an artist or made art. And I don't think I ever really kind of named it as such, but I do remember very, very vividly of being at home latch-hooking, right? Being at home, making like these little knots of friendship bracelets, and doing things that girls do, right, at that age. And I also remember like me doing like the fusible bead kind of work, right? And that was like my thing. And very early on, I wasn't as interested in like paper, pencil, illustrating like that kind of way of working. I was more so interested in like the repetitive craft way of working, right? And so when I think about that moment and then fast forward to college, wasn't quite making the connections then. And to be honest, I feel like I had a conversation about the notion of craft in college. And there was like this almost like, not taboo, but it was like, we don't really talk about the work as craft, right? And I'm sure you can relate to this, right? Because it would, maybe diminish the work and I wish at that time that I would have pursued this idea of like what that really means and like, what does craft mean? And so, yeah, I just feel like that was just a way of working for me that I appreciated. And moving beyond that point, that continued. But I think I held this like mindset of like not thinking about the work as this like craft and repetitive and, focus on materiality and how do we, preserve and do cultural preservation within this like practice of making that craft is. And I was just really focused on like, what's the story, right? Yeah. So when I think about kind of like my work now, I'm very much interested in craft. Like I think I really kind of like put that former mindset down and was like, wait a minute, there's a reason why craft was excluded from the canon of my art history when I studied it. So let me like find out why. Let me get curious about that. And the more that I read and the more that I started to understand the, indigenous practices of craft and like how this is an honoring process. And I was already interested in like this slow way of working and like this slow meditative process that it was like very much a part of my ethos and like who I am. And so it was just a matter of like getting clear about that. Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit more about this thesis project. I mean, I know for a lot of us that thesis project can be a kind of like a point in time where there was a before and sort of an after. Sure. And also, of course, it has a kind of like massive undertaking and pressure and anxiety and all of the things. It's like a marker, And so tell me a little bit more about that. Project from your thesis show.
Yeah. So I was really, I was trying, to be honest, I was trying to pick something because I feel like my heart and gut just wanted to make beautiful things. Like I just wanted to be able to have the technical skill to make beautiful things. But to graduate, right, you need a concept. You need a concept. You need, and what I knew is that I love to like make the same thing over and over and over again. So, and then too, with me, kind of really diving into the art history aspect that Julie McGee introduced me to, I was also interested in the Black body because I had never really heard it or seen it talked about in that way. So I was trying to find my way of like, okay, if I want to talk about my experiences while also experiencing, right, how do I do that? And I think in a way, there was a part of my journey too of like not having a relationship with my father where I kind of like, you know, question a little bit of like who I was, right? And so that led me to make a piece for or during that time in college as well. So I think like many college students, it's part of the journey where you're trying to find your way. And you are, I think, interested in things. You're also trying to graduate. You also have somewhat of an understanding of what you like to do and the material you want to work in or like to work in. But you're not quite there yet. Mm-hmm. And I think for me, the beautiful thing about that time is, and when I look back at that time, it's like, oh, wow, you are still, even again, middle school, repetitive. College, repetitive, now repetitive, right? And so this is just doing the same gesture over and over again. That's a little bit of who you are. So like, let's lean in. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the work then was, you know, I was interested in like, how do we talk about beauty in the context of like women and Black bodies and what does that mean to me? But it was just the beginning. I feel like I had just maybe scratch the surface around what it could be. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, P.S., I'm also aware that you have a beverage. And so if you want to just like pause for a second and just drink, you can. No one has to worry about it being dead air. Okay, now, one thing I remember about our conversation before is that there's never like well, Brittney was just doing this, and then Brittney graduated, and then Brittney did that. Like, I know you had like 1,000 things sort of in the burner when you were in college that sort of moved towards time after school. What else was happening in the life of Brittney as you were working in school and getting ready to graduate?
Oh, man. You know, it's so interesting that you asked that question, because I feel like in a lot of ways I'm a hummingbird, where it's just like I like to go from flower to flower to flower. And that interests me. I think I'm really motivated by the material, but also too if it has some kind of nostalgic reverence or memory for me, I'm even more into it. So during that time, you know, I really enjoyed photography. And this is also very, oh man, it's funny because when I get in here and I start to really tell the story, I begin to make even more connections, right? But in college, I loved black and white photography. I didn't think that it would be something that I would like pursue because the hand wasn't in it enough for me. But I loved it. And that was one thing where I was like, man, if I could figure this out, I would figure out how to use this in my work. But again, time, right? So photography was big for me. I also, you know, was in the ceramic studio quite a bit. But I, you know, and throwing on the wheel is its own thing. And I was okay at it. And it also hurt my wrist a lot. And I was like, yeah, this isn't it. Then I moved to the wood shop, right? And then too, when you're in college, that's what you have to do. You have to take, you know, all these, you know, prereqs before you declare the medium by which you're going to work in. But I really gravitated to photography. But it was when I got into the wood shop where I was equally terrified and inspired, right, to be in there, just because of all the machinery and tools. But I feel like even because you know me as a student of U of M, but even before I got to U of M, I was at MCA. And so at MCA, there were several classes that I took as well. I took a 3D course there where we had to do like some repetitive woodworking, right? Loved it. And then there was another like 2D collage class that I took at MCA as well. Loved that, right? And I think having this conversation with you and then also just like talking to my students and my mentees around like documenting their process and like journaling along the way is so important, because it helps you to remember like what it is that you truly admire, are interested in, and really want to pursue, right? So those were the kind of things that like really sparked my interest as far as like the medium and the classes that I was into. But as far as my thesis work, I just remember like, yeah, let's let's try to pull something together that feels true and that feels right for the moment of me right now. And I wasn't really pressed about I wasn't pressed about what I was making then, because I knew that I was headed somewhere. And so I didn't want to try to box myself in, because, I was wanting to make technically sound things. I was also thinking about launching a business right after that. So I wasn't really kind of wedded to that. It was a moment in time that I needed to work some things out in that moment, and so I did.
Now, you were saying you were thinking about starting a business.
Yeah.
And I know from the last interview, you were really sort of talking about being really sort of fiscally sound and being very aware and sort of realistic about this crazy stuff that we do. And now, what was the business that you were thinking about doing when you were going to graduate?
So when I was like my last year of college, I was making jewelry. I was a jewelry maker. And so I would make jewelry from wood, from beads, from glass mosaic. And so, I was selling my work while also in college. And I wanted to kind of pursue that. Like I wanted to make utilitarian things for people to, wear and buy, right? And so it started with jewelry.
And I remember also, last time you were talking about being there in the cohort with Lauren and with Britt, who were also sort of thinking about sort of the entrepreneurial aspect and also sort of like probably in a way the kind of small p political, making things that are small that an everyday person can afford and that can be a part of an everyday life. Was this something that was also a part of that early thought process for you, or was it more like, these are things that I really love to do, and these are the things that I want to make, and then we can sell them?
Yeah. No, it definitely was a part of, I think, being there with, I think Britt specifically, she, in her journey back to Memphis, because I don't think I shared a studio space with Britt. I can't remember at one point, but she was making her pottery goods and was really focused on that. And I feel like even in our conversations, there was something about people living with the thing over time that was interesting to me. And I think before even having that moment, I didn't think about the jewelry and the things that I was making in that way. But I think conversations with my peers at the time had me thinking about then how do we make, again, these technically sound things that would travel with people over time? Yeah.
Now, can you describe some of the jewelry that you were making, or some of the objects that you were making?
For sure. I can even show you. So I was trying to have this contrast and mix between hard and soft. And so I would make these long, delicate, glass seed bead necklaces, but then I would put a bolt or a nut kind of screw on it. I was making these these wooden dowel necklaces that I would then screw a bolt kind of nut on both ends to wear them, and I would paint them. I was making earrings out of mosaic pieces, where I would even kind of create these studded earrings that were kind of colorful and such. So it was just this mix of wood and hardware and beads.
Because and then I also kind of remember, I remember the thing about the Triple B. What was it? It was you had a cool name, or you have a cool name for this business. What was it again?
Don't Blink.
Don't Blink. Yes. And so I remember that, and I remember seeing that on the Instagram and sort of being aware of it. And I remember, of course, from our earlier conversations in class, where you'll talk about this thing. But one thing that I'm interested in or curious about is your practice has always been, or the way that you've thought about your work has always been so multivalent. There's so many different parts to it. To this day, there's so many different parts to it that you think of as kind of like a whole practice. When you begin to make the Don't Blink, to me, I would think there would be a thought process that in there that there would have to be a kind of consistency, a kind of overall feel or a look or a brand, however we want to describe it. But it seems like that would be a thing that might go against your natural temperament. Was that tricky for you, or was that easy?
Which is why I don't do it anymore.
Right, okay. After that 5-minute preamble from Hamlet where I'm just talking about all of that stuff. So that was tricky.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of my challenges during that time was, I had a brand, and, I started in jewelry. I moved to textile. I moved to leather, right? It's definitely very much a part of, of how, how I work, and I would confuse people. Right. So I would go to a market, and I had a market at Urban Outfitters once, and some folks came to see my work, and they were like, "Oh, is this your work?" And I was like, "Yeah." So it was not good for my brand, because I was so interested in so many things, and I would confuse people. And so even when I would try to pull it all under one umbrella, right, I would talk to people like, "I like all these different things. How do I do that?" And brand strategists and people that I love and admire would be like, "You need to pick one." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, how do I do? I can do that." You need to pick one. You need to pick one. And I feel like even in the work that I make today, I was just thinking about my mentor and asking my mentor, do I need to pick one thing? Because even with the artists that I love and admire and that I study, they have kind of that one lane. And I'm like, but that's not me. I say that I do collage, fiber, and mixed media for a reason, right? And so now it's just more so what's the motivation behind the work? So if the motivation is clear, then it I wouldn't say it doesn't matter what you work in, but if the motivation is clear and the journey is clear, then the work will fall under that, clarity, so to speak. But yeah, it was problematic.
Now, one of the things that happens sometimes when I'm doing these interviews is I hear the voice of people who are listening to it. And so they just sort of chimed in and said, "Well, hold up, Brittney has a mentor. Let's ask about this mentor thing. Don't let that drop, Hamlet." So talk to me a little bit about this mentor relationship. And I know that it will probably totally derail our chronological progress. But talk to me a little bit about that. To me, that sounds really interesting and fruitful.
Yeah, for sure. So I feel like, mentorship is great. I think we all need them. I think we will need them for the rest of our lives, right? And I have, there are several people in my life who have guided me. And maybe we didn't name it as such, right? We didn't name this as a mentor-mentee relationship. But they definitely have spoken to my life in ways that have helped my journey. My now mentor, I asked. It's the first time I ever was like, "Hey, can you actually mentor me?" And he was like, "What took you so long?" Of course. And he was like, I don't mentor everybody, so I'm so excited that you did. And that's Derek Fajor.
Okay.
And so he has been very, very just helpful in guiding and stewarding me. We have had a couple of conversations, and he has come to my studio and that kind of thing. But even in our interactions, and it's a very new relationship. I think we started on this journey maybe a year ago, year and a half ago, something like that. But we have known each other for 4 years or so. Actually, when he started Contemporary Arts Memphis is when we started to talk more and learn more about what he was doing and learn more about the work that I was doing at the organization that I was in at the time. And so we've known each other and been in spaces for the past 4 years, but this mentorship relationship is fairly new. And the interactions that we've had, even just within that time, have been like so fruitful. He has helped to like, and it's I want to say the smallest things, but that's not what I mean. It's just like he says something and I'm like, yes, like I would have paid for that, you know? And he is so authentic and has a heart posture that is like beautiful and gracious. And it's just somebody that I want to be, in alignment with. And he's great for that. And he's also done some things. And he's in a direction of, where I want to go. And so our most recent conversation, he helped me to like really kind of hone in and identify, what it is that I want to make. And he helped me to really kind of get settled in the fact that materiality is important to me. And he just kind of helped to like, he threw out a few things, a few breadcrumbs, and I picked them up and I've been like running ever since. Right. So yeah, mentorship, especially I think mentorship is imperative for everything, but there's something about having a mentor as an artist. Right. So even when I think about Julie McGee, we never named that was a mentorship, but she definitely in my mind was a mentor. So yeah.
Great. Okay. Back to the chronology.
So
if I remember right, the whole time you were doing the Don't Blink, you were also doing things that you might think of as like not business related.
I was.
And you're doing these things in the studio. I know that you also are doing a lot of work in the community in a lot of different ways. And so I know that at this point there are many forks, and we'll probably have to have like a mind map or a family tree or some kind of thing to sort of go along with this. But the PDF will follow. So, so then as you make that shift, you're working on that. What else is happening at the same time?
Yeah, so I'm working on that. I'm also in my studio on my sewing machine drawing portraits. And so it's like, from the journey of the business, it's like it starts as jewelry, right? And then it moves into, and really the jewelry was inspired by the thesis work because I was making wearable work, right? Making those, wood pieces, those beaded works that we could wear. That moved to jewelry, and from there, I wanted to like make things that were bigger in a way, but also utilitarian. And my mother had gifted me a sewing machine years prior that I had never opened. And at this point, it's like, well, I want to do something more, right? My interest, and I taught myself how to sew. And so I was like, okay. And I taught myself the basics, how to do the bobbin thing, right? And I was like, well, I feel like I still need a little bit more. So then I took like this intro class, a sewing class at Shapely Back, which is like a place for sewing things. And we made pajama pants. And I was like, well, that's enough. I got enough skill now to like do the thing. I learned about the different kind of feet you can put on your sewing machine. And so I literally asked myself the question, like, what else can I do with this? Which is a question that I ask myself often in my work, which is why you see what you see. Because I'm always asking the question, what can you do with this? How can you make this unconventional? How can you make it be seen differently than how we experience it now? And so I went back home and just was like sewing on everything. Changing the feet out on the sewing machine. Well, what happens when you do this? What happens when you do that? And literally learned about interfacing and like embroidery techniques, and like was on that journey, was on YouTube trying to figure stuff out. And then I started drawing, right, through inspiration from these ebony magazines that I had acquired. I started drawing these images and then taking it to my sewing machine and tracing over that drawing. Also at the time, I was working for a nonprofit organization here as their curator and community engagement person. So I'm also curating shows. I'm in community learning about people's stories and trying to get an understanding of the landscape before this organization like took off. And so I'm hearing people, I'm collaborating with people, I'm curating shows and things like that. And then there was one show that I wanted to curate that highlighted several artists from the community that we were in, and it was called Here All Along. And during the meeting for that show, they were like, you should put work in here too, Brittney. Like you're part of this journey too. And that was the first time I debuted one of my sewn portraits. And again, oh man, this is why I love talking to you. When I think about that work, it was, basic flat background, right? Had some border trim, and then the focal point of the image. I still use that basic flat background in my collage work when I think about that now. But that was the work that I was making. So, I had, at the time, I had the leather work going. I had these sewn portraits going. I had a job in the nonprofit space working in community. I had another great mentor, Linda Steele, at the time, who was like, really interested in my development and my journey. And so all these things were working for me at the same time. So.
P.S. This is also the point where our chronologies intersect. So
Yes.
This was when I met you, because I remember seeing those pieces, and I remember one of the things that immediately drew me to you was how fun it was to hang out and talk with you while I was hanging these shows and adjusting the lights and doing a lot of changes and things like that. And I remember you were talking about, at that time, I remember our conversations in terms of the way that you were really conscious of Crosstown Arts sort of being here in this space, and then also being very conscious from very early on about the impact that would have on the community, and then also really early on conscious of your power as a curator. Power might not be the right word, but maybe your influence and the opportunity that you had in terms of highlighting, underlining, spotlighting some of these different artists in the community that had not otherwise been seen. Talk to me a little bit about that. Was curating something that you came to sort of naturally, or was it a big learning curve? How did it work for you?
It was a learning curve in that trying to assess and look at the work of artists and trying to determine with the artists what to put in the exhibition felt challenging for me. But what came very naturally for me was finding the artist and talking with them. So one of the things that I loved about the shows that I curated is that there was always a video that would accompany the show, right? And so I would go with the videographer, Justin, at the time, and we would go to the artist studio and we would do like this video of them to like promote their show. And that was like the best part, because it came quite natural to me to sit down and hear and listen and talk to folks and hear their stories and their journeys and how they got to where they were. And that excited me, because it also, I think, fed my curiosity and desire to just learn about the artists here, but also the history of artists here. Like it was incredible. And the so many people that I met, I'm like, was, in awe about them and their journeys. And so when I thought about me being a curator, so when I graduated college, I didn't quite know what it was going to be. I knew art was going to sit at the center, right? And I was going to find my way just because, I'm a hard worker. But I didn't set myself like, oh, curator, oh, this, oh, that. It was more so of like, what do I care about? What do I care about? And go after what I care about. And so, my role as curator at Crosstown was more kind of inspired by my role in community. And so when I went into community and I'm meeting folks and I'm in community meetings and I'm hearing them, I then, kind of go back to Crosstown. And in a way, they were already kind of doing shows with artists, already in community. And then, I'm not quite sure how it played out, but I feel like people saw my desire to be in community and was like, well, you do that. you might be good at that. And I took it on and I loved it. It's one of my favorite parts about the job. And I ran with it. And then too, I had gotten like a fellowship, a community engagement fellowship that Linda Steele put together when she was here. And so what I was learning there and traveling to Chicago and meeting Theaster Gates and going to the South Side and being in the Sony, Island Arts Bank and like seeing all those things was just like fueling me even more around this idea of care and community and, cultural like preservation and community creative placemaking and place, keeping and all this other stuff, like all this language and terminology and all the things, all of that was unfolding all at once for me. And I was excited about it. Like it fueled me in a way where I was like, this feels right to me.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the things I'm picking up on in your talking about this is almost like a kind of, you have this engagement, you have this connection with the community. And I think at once you're recognizing things that need to be fixed. And I think or at least addressed and recognized. And then I'm also hearing you talk about the possibility of affecting a kind of change, in the same way that Theaster Gates was talking about it, in his many interviews. Mm-hmm. And I'm interested, was all of that sort of coming together at the same time? Like, were you already engaged in the community? I mean, I know you're engaged in this practice. We've talked a little bit about the U of M community and other things, but how was it that you got clued into or began to enter? Because I remember you were really active in like Little Chicago and Smoky City. And am I saying that right?
It's New Chicago, Klondike Smoky City.
Klondike
is
Smoky
the
City.
neighborhood, but there's also a New Chicago.
Okay, yes. But I remember that being a part of that conversation in that area that's just north of Crosstown, down Watkins. And so was that something that you were already a part of, or was it something that sort of came from your connection in Crosstown?
It came from my connection in Crosstown.
Okay.
So my entry in community, because again, it's very early on of me graduating college, right? Mm-hmm. And so my entry in the community work that I was doing came specifically, because even before Crosstown, I worked at Urban Art. Right. So start.
Pause. Damn it, Brittney. All right.
Should we start there? Okay.
No. Keep going, and then we'll backtrack, and then I want you to talk about Linda Steele too.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So my first, like when I graduated college, my first job was the Urban Art Commission.
Okay.
And it's really there where I realized that, artists, obviously, with public art, we as artists those who are working in the public art space have a responsibility to community. And it was really that job where I felt like I was introduced to this understanding around like, what does it mean to make art, right? What does it mean to make art for community, in community, with community, right? And before I got that job, I was actually volunteering at the Urban Art Commission. They had done a project in, I forget the name of the park, but we were, the artists had volunteer opportunities where we were making like these mosaic seats for a bench she had created, I believe. And so I was volunteering while in college, making this work for the artists. And then, the opportunity came up for the job right as I was graduating, and I applied. I went for it. I had some administrative, I had an administrative journey before then, working at an animal hospital. And so I like used that to talk about how I would do great here because, the skills are transferable, and I got the job. Also, too, I think I had volunteered as well. And so, like, again, getting out in the community, and, like, they were like, oh, anyway. So, got that job, and...
Now, who was there at the time? Was that when Carissa was running it? It was before John Whedon?
After
John Whedon. And
Give
so
me a
then
second.
It was...
She's from Germany.
I know, yeah.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Christina.
Yes.
Christina Alonso.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Christina Alonso. Yep.
And so you were there at that time, and then who else was working in the office? Was it
Sippin.
Okay, yeah, of course.
Sippin was there. Whitney was transitioning out. Whitney, she went to Rhodes.
Ranson.
Yes, I was like, I can't remember her last name. But yeah, she was transitioning out. I was coming in. There might have been another intern there, but I was there part-time. Sifin was there full-time. And then it was Christina. And then we had another person in finance. And then we would have interns too, kind of rolling in and out.
I mean, to me, that's such a, I mean, in terms of, you were talking about your administrative abilities, you know, and being there at the animal hospital before. I mean, that is like a 3-ring circus of spinning plates and projects that are 10 years old, just starting, almost done, all of those things. I mean, was that difficult for you to make that transition? Okay.
Goodness. Yeah, I remember there was one project on my books, on my docket, that was like 13 years old. Then I had another project on my docket that was like 7 years old, and they hadn't even started the work yet. And it was such a learning experience around like all the different people involved, the politics of it, how sometimes artists could feel stifled by public art and what they, you know, create, but also too how important it is to include community, because it's their play, you know what I mean? It was so eye-opening around like, oh wow, like this is a whole different way of thinking about art from where I come from, right? Meaning like being in a studio. And so that was like inspiring and invigorating, but also challenging. I was like, well, as an artist, you know, because I was the liaison between the client and the artist, right? And so I heard both people always, right? And I had to answer to both people always. And it was very interesting to hear like how public art is made, and, you know, the dollars that get spent there, who gets the public art, how, what makes a great portfolio, how do they, you know, present, all of that. And then I would hear the story of the artists around, you know, like, why am I not getting the projects? They want me to change my entire design. And it was just interesting to be in the middle of all of that. And then having to communicate to all parties in a way that was rooted in, obviously, like, here's what we got to do, here are the facts, but also honoring people and their process and their experience and their roles and their job. It was, yeah.
I mean, to me, I also sort of remember when you give that beautiful presentation to the professional practices class, how so often, again and again, this kind of slow, meticulous series of actions that later results in a piece, something coming to fruition in the Urban Art Commission, a curatorial project. All of these things seem like they fit in really well with your temperament, but I also know that working with a bureaucracy in the way that it is, with so many different hoops, was working with so many different personalities and so many different layers of the process. Did that work pretty well for your temperament?
I don't know if it worked well. I think I was able to navigate it, right? But I don't know. I didn't like it. I was able to navigate it, but I didn't like it, which I think is also why I chose to transition. Part of the reason why I chose to transition.
Now, how long were you there at Urban Art?
I was.
It was a couple of years.
Great question. Yeah, it was a couple of years, maybe 2.5 years or so.
Yeah.
Well, 2.5, 3 years, because I started part-time and then I was promoted to a full-time position. So, yeah. But I think, though, that what Urban Art did do was spark my interest in community. And so I was like, there's something about this idea of community and making art for a community that I'm interested in. Which then led me to Crosstown. But even how I got to Crosstown was not where I ended, right? So my first introduction to Crosstown is that it's so funny. I have so many things working all the time.
I know.
This is just like proven to me.
And that's why I'm totally not upset about you forgetting about this whole Urban Art thing. And also, like, I kind of feel like we need to do like this thing where we sort of zoom out and we're in outer space, and now we can see all of the forks in Brittney's tree and where all it reaches. I have no idea how to even visualize this.
I may do that when I get to my studio.
Okay.
Like I have this mind map already in my studio around like my interests and like where I want to go. But I think what I might do, this is encouraging me to zoom out to your point. And I have a list on my phone of like different interactions that help to tell my story. It's just the way that I journey and I document. But what I might do is just like zoom out and like pick all of these points of my,
It's amazing.
It's incredible. Of just like, here's what I'm doing during this timestamp.
Well, also, to me, it's amazing and sort of awe-inspiring. I mean, it really is. I mean, whenever you come and do that presentation, when I do it, I'm like, this is going to be really great. In part because, like, I think you really listen to the opportunities, you know, and I really think you have an amazing sense of what is working right and what is not working right and what is feeding you and what is not feeding you. And I mean, to me, and it's so great as the bystander to watch the students hear you and talk about those things. I mean, there's a beautiful thing that happens when I think they see themselves in you and also recognize the importance of intuition and also recognize the importance of opportunity and then just sort of seizing that opportunity. I mean, to me, all of that feels really powerful and really wonderful. No question in that, just an admiration point. So you're zooming out and all of these other things are happening.
Yep. So I'm zooming out. While I was working at the Urban Art Commission part-time, I also held a job at the Kroc Center.
And you were perfecting nuclear fission in your spare time, just sort of juggling these things.
Yeah.
Coaching a softball team. Right.
Yeah. I had a job part-time at the Kroc Center. Here's how the Crosstown Connection connects though, right? So I'm working at the Kroc Center. I'm working in their Child Watch department, which is, if you're familiar with that, but just for listeners, if you have a membership at the Kroc and you have children, you can drop your child off or you go do your thing, right? And that thing looks, however, if you want to sit in the cafe and do work on the computer, if you want to work out, whatever. So I'm in Child Watch and a man comes up with his baby and he's trying to check his baby in for the first time. And so I'm going with him through the process of like, okay, this is what you need to do. More than happy to watch your baby. This is how long, your baby can stay. And it was Chris Minor. And so he's checking in and I go, you look familiar. And he's like, oh, do I? I'm like, yeah. You just had a show at the University of Memphis. I just graduated from there and I went to your talk. Mind you, it was the same talk that I wore the ragged makeup at. Same talk. Can't make this up. Same talk. So I'm like, yeah. No, I went to your talk. I really appreciate your work and how you talk about your work. It's really interesting. He goes, oh wow, okay, yeah. Well, thanks for saying hello. He goes, I'm starting a gallery on what's the street? Cleveland? No, Cleveland. And sometimes we need gallery assistants to just kind of sit in the space. Would you be willing to do that? And I was like, yeah, of course. Anything art related, I want to be a part of it. And so we exchanged numbers, and he didn't call me for like a year, I think. It was some time. Let me not put a timestamp on it because I don't remember specifically, but it was some time. Like I just forgot about it and was like, oh well. And I was still working at Urban Art. And then he like texted me and was like, hey, I think I got a job for you. And I was like, okay. So I go to what then was the 430. It wasn't 430 space yet. It was just the gallery. I go there. He shows me the gallery and it gets a little fuzzy, but I come back for he calls me again to come back. And then I tour what was called Story Booth. And he was like, I got a job for you. I met at that time Nat. And so we're talking. And my first job in Crosstown was in Story Booth with Nat with the young people. It's my first job. Loved it. would do after school programming, would ride the van with them to bring them back. And so I always have loved working with young people. Like my mom owned a daycare when I was younger, and young people have always been very adjacent to me in some kind of way. And so I, settled right in with that. And got to know Nat quite a bit. And, he also would talk to me about the other artists that he knew. He introduced me to Mary Jo. And he introduced me to Mary Jo because I remember being at Crosstown, and I had this piece that I was beading, like with seed beads and thread. And he was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Well, I'm trying to figure this out. Like, I'm beading this bead." And he was like, "Oh, do you know Mary Jo?" And I was like, "No, I don't." And then that's how me and Mary Jo met. But I'm sure we were bound to meet anyway, because she worked at Crosstown, but in the flea market at the time. Anyway, but yeah, I forget the question. Where are we in time? Where are we in time?
Well, we're sort of at that place where you made that transition from being at the Urban Art Commission to being here at Crosstown, or in its manifestation across the street. Mm-hmm. And so how was it that you made that transition from being there in the story booth to being in the office with the curatorial position?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what happened, I was doing story booth. How did I get into because then I got promoted to community engagement manager. And I'm trying to think what happened in that moment. I think I remember what it was. So story booth, we did the youth program stuff, but they also would bring in authors to do like these really, these big kind of book talks and things like that. And I would be at every one. I would be tuned in. And so I think with my conversations and relationships with Nat, and just me talking about like community and how special this is, I think in some way or another, I was promoted to community engagement manager. And I feel like too, I had gotten that, it wasn't called fellowship with Linda Steele around community. And I think somewhere in between that, I was promoted.
Okay, that's a good place to sort of pause and sort of look to the side and talk about Linda Steele a little bit, because she's one of those people that I'm sort of aware of, but I don't know if I've ever had an interaction with her. I know the things that she's done in the community, but I'm curious, talk to me a little bit about that relationship.
Yeah. So how did I meet Linda? So she's not from Memphis, and she's going to be so upset that I can't remember her hometown. I literally should know this. But she had come to Memphis with a role with Arts Memphis to help kind of lift and launch more equitable work around the arts in Memphis. And she had been doing that and really launching some really beautiful things as it relates to that. And so my entry with her, I think I'm gonna have to call Linda and say, when did I meet you? But I feel like I was introduced to her because I was an artist and because I was working at Crosstown, and I needed to know like who the organizations were who were, funding art, looking at art, or thinking, in the arts ecosystem, if you will. Like I needed to know who are these people, who are the organizations. And that's how I met Linda. And when I met her, she was just like one of those people that, again, her heart posture, right? Like to me, she was so open and forthcoming and gracious. And I feel like, I don't know if this is true or not, but I feel like, and I'll have to ask her, that she saw a little bit of herself in me and was like, really interested in helping to put me on a path that would help the arts ecosystem in Memphis. And we cultivated a relationship. And then when I got that fellowship, we grew even closer in like, my work and my interest and like how to get there, and she would help me create like the roadmap to get there, and would point me in several different directions. You know, we would have meetings and I would say, I'm interested in this and, you know, I'm interested in that. And before I knew it, she had linked me with somebody to continue to explore that with. So yeah, she was a true gem in my journey for sure.
And so at that time, you're also there at Crosstown. And so,
yes.
So talk to me a little bit about some of the projects that you did at Crosstown. I mean, you mentioned that show, Here All Along. Talk to me about that, because I remember, I have memories of that, but it's probably overlapping with some other shows that you organized. Talk to me a little bit about that show, because that was the first one you did. No. Okay.
Yeah.
Hamlet, you're wrong.
I know.
What was the first one that you did? Do you remember?
Let me think.
I know it's like a pop quiz.
No. I like it though. I like tracking in this way. The first one I did, that one's gonna be hard. But I think that some of the ones that I remember were I did and collaborated with Andrea Morales and another photographer who I think she ended up, or another photographer that they brought to the table. I can't remember though her name. And then I did the show with Michael, blanking on his last name, but who was legally blind and painter. And then I did Here All Along with artists. There was another exhibition that we partnered with MCA and I think Shelby County Schools to showcase young people's work. I have to go look back at some others, but Here All Along was toward like the end of my journey in that role, because my role at Crosstown changed 3 times before I transitioned.
It's such a, I mean, at that time, in terms of thinking about the timeline of Crosstown, I mean, really at that time, it was this like, we need to get this done. And here are some things that we're trying to figure out. And so, like, you know, like you were saying, you would be over there doing this, and then they would be like, oh, you really like that. And so they would try to, like, get you over there. It really was. I mean, it sounds like it was sort of like a crazy house. And it kind of was.
For sure.
But also, it was a place where people were, like, looking and seeing and, in my mind, sort of open to and receptive to the possibilities of a thing doesn't necessarily have to just be this thing, you know. It was like, there's also this possibility and there's also this thing, and trying to figure out, like, do we do this? Do we do that? And so it sounds like, I mean, you were saying that your job position here changed 3 or probably more times. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think you're exactly right in that. And, you know, it was very much a startup. And we all were trying to find our way in a lot of ways, and also, you know, tapping into our strengths and what we liked, and while also, you know, looking to get things done. And I think that and most of the staff were either self-proclaimed artists or working creatives in some kind of way. And I think that's also kind of how creativity is. It's a bunch of problem solving, a bunch of like, what about this? Maybe not that. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of how, in a lot of ways, the work unfolded for us. So it's not, to me, it's not that, you know, wild or crazy that the changes in that organization were what they were because of like just how startup it was. So yeah, I started in Story Booth, and then that moved to community engagement manager for just Crosstown Arts, and then that moved to community engagement manager for Crosstown Concourse. And so those were the 3 roles that yeah.
Now, how long were you there? Or here? We're in the Crosstown building, but how long were you there here?
Let's see. I was at Crosstown for maybe 3.5 years. 3.5, 4? question mark. For sure 3, maybe 3.5, 4. Yeah. So I tell you when I was not here. I was not here when the building was up. So I was here very, very beginning, very much like I, remember very vividly being in this building with a hard hat on, right? And like walking through and making sure that we were, all safe. Well, I wasn't making sure we were safe, but I think all of us were like, are we safe? So that's when I was here. By the time the building was finished, I don't even remember when that was. Do you remember? Yeah. By the time the building was finished, I was no longer here working for Crosstown.
Now, at that time, I also know, you've got this activity that's happening here with Crosstown. Of course, you've also got your own studio practice that's happening. What are some other things that are going on? And then also, how does that transition from Crosstown to the next step? What does that look like?
Yeah, so other things that were going on. So working in my studio, working at Crosstown, like, doing the work of the role, but I'm also going to community meetings that are a part of my job, but also outside of my job. So part of my job was to like understand, obviously, this mile radius of where the building was going to be, because it was important for the organization to know like how it was going to change the community. It was important for me to know that. And that was the other thing too. Like I was the voice at the meeting of like, okay, y'all, just reminding folks are here before we got here. What are we going to do to protect the cultural vibrancy of this space and of this neighborhood, right? It's going to change, right? And that was a large part of my role. It wasn't lost on me either that, being a Black woman in the role of community engagement was very typical, right? Because of the city we live in, being majority Black. And so in a way, I was in community in Klondike, Smoky City, in New Chicago, in Valentine, Evergreen. I was hitting all the adjacent neighborhoods, including this one, right? As someone who, was like, hey, I work for this organization and I understand that what's coming might change things. And so I want to know what you're doing right now so that we could either support, we could either shine light on, what can we do so that we don't overshine you who have been here doing the work, And that was like what I carried with me. And so in addition to doing all of that, I was going to community meetings at night, like for hours. Like I would go to Klondike Smoky City community meeting and just be in the space listening. I would go wherever it was open and, folks would allow me. And so, yeah, all of that was kind of working at the same time where I was learning people, building relationships. And so it became, where the impetus was, this was part of my job. It became like, oh, I'm here because I'm building a relationship, like outside of my job in a way, So how I got to Klondike, I was going to the meetings and then I started to just sit with Miss Quincy and sit at her feet and she would tell me about the community even further. And then that led to me going to the backpack drive on Saturday. And then that led to, and so it just became this unfolding of just my desire to learn and be, in and with people and community and build relationships.
Now, at that time, I mean, part of me is interested in not just that you are doing these things, because I realize that this is a thing, this kind of engagement, this kind of connection is a part of your temperament and a part of something that has been cultivated for your whole life. And I'm interested in how, when you're there, you're able to do the thing that we've been talking about, which is looking at a situation, thinking about what's going on in a situation, in an environment, and then thinking about possibilities for improvement or possibilities or opportunities for not expansion, not fixing something, but help, possibilities for you to help. How was it that you were framing that in your mind? P.S. I know I'm saying this as someone who it doesn't necessarily work that way. And so I'm interested in the way that your brain is processing this to help me understand how it works. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay.
So I don't think that I don't think that the relationship that we were cultivating together in community, I don't think it started in that way, right? I think what really happened was I am naturally curious about people and their stories. I'm naturally curious about what has happened before. I'm naturally curious about past, present, how they intersect, how they, push things forward. And so naturally, I go into a space, and at that time, a community space, and I naturally just sit and listen. And that is interesting to me. And I think from there, you start to then hear, right, the beautiful things, right, and also the challenging things. And then I think as an artist and a problem solver by nature, I then start to make connections around, is there a way in which I could help? And sometimes that's not always the thing. But I think, naturally my desire for care kind of shows up in all the things that I do. And so when I'm in a meeting, at that time when I was in a meeting and I would hear about the beautiful things of that community, and then I would hear the things that, were challenging and that really kind of pained them, I would think like, there might be a way in which, I could support. And that's how I got to working in Klondike with Miss Quincy on a very particular project with girls, with high schoolers.
Okay, so talk to me about Miss Quincy.
Yeah, so she's like the matriarch for Klondike Smoky City. She is I don't know if she might be the founder of the CDC, but I know for sure that she's held the position of executive director for the Klondike Smoky City CDC for many, many years. She's also the kind of person too where it's like if you want to know about that community, you just have matriarchs. She's one of those, right? One of the people that you go see. And so going to these meetings, I would just kind of talk with her and listen, and she would share things with me. And there was an artist, there was a grant from the Assisi Foundation, and it was like an artist nonprofit grant where artists could apply with a nonprofit as a fiscal sponsor to then lift a project. And so I was talking to Miss Quincy, and she was sharing some things with me about the community and the young people in the community. And I love young people, right? And I had mentioned to her, like, there's this grant with the Assisi Foundation out that you should maybe look into. There might be a possibility for you to, get some funding to lift some of the things you want to do. And she was like, well, I don't really know about any, art thing. I know she was like, I know the things that we want to do around, young people, and at the time, it was gang violence, it was crime, it was, things of that nature. But she was like, I don't really have any ideas around art. And I was like, oh, okay. I said, well, let me think about it. If you're willing to hear me out, let me think about it, and I'll bring something back to you. And she was like, yeah, I'm interested in that. So I thought about it, came back to her and was like, what if we started an arts apprenticeship program? And she's like, tell me more. And I said, well, what if Klondike Smoky City CDC had a program specifically for artists or young people where we taught them how to create an art project, or taught them a creative skill that addressed a social problem here in the community. Now, that I got there because of that fellowship that I was in with Linda Steele, and all of that community, social change, artivism, art as activism work that I was learning, going to the South, right? All of that helped to like prime me for this conversation with Miss Quincy. And so I was like, what do you think about that? And she was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And she said, but I want to make sure that the program is for girls And I said, okay, tell me why. And she was like, because when it comes to gang violence for them, they're overlooked. We always go after the boys, but there's the girls are also highly impacted. And I was like, okay, let's do it. So I wrote the grant for the Assisi Foundation, first grant I ever wrote, and got it. And I was like, okay, we're starting this program. And when talking with Miss Quincy about this particular program, I was talking to her as Brittney and Miss Quincy around some of the things that Klondike wanted to do and see. I was not talking to her as Brittney, an employee of Crosstown. And that was very intentional because I didn't want that work to be overshadowed by Crosstown. I wanted the community, Klondike, to get its honor from that. Like, this was something that they had been thinking about. And so let's figure out how we can do that.
Now, not to derail you, but I'm curious, where were you living at the time?
Mm-hmm. Where was I living at the time?
I know. Now you have to go through that thing. Because I remember, to me, the thing that's interesting is that you are so community-minded, and I'm wondering if the community that you call home or called home at that time in the sort of maybe early teens, this is where we are now, right? Sort of in the early teens, mid-teens. Where was it that you were calling home? Is that where your studio was?
So at that time, so this is like, we're talking 2015.
Okay.
2016. I am living in Midtown.
Okay.
I'm living in Midtown off of Manila, and the adjacent street to me is Southern.
Yeah.
I'm like backed up against Southern.
Yeah, kind of near Payne's.
Near Payne's.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Everything is in relation to barbecue for me. I'm sorry to do it. Okay, so I gotcha. And so this was a place where you were living, and you and Jamon were there. And I can't remember, when does the kiddo arrive?
2017.
Okay, that's a whole nother thing. Hold on.
Whole nother thing. So, because now I'm like, wait, where was I living? So I think we were actually just transitioning out of that house, and we moved downtown off of Carolina.
Okay.
Because I'm remembering that we had a sleepover at my house with the girls, and we were in that apartment, which was a upgrade for us because the house on Manila was not. It was old. It was really old, and we were excited to be in a new apartment complex with nice amenities. So yeah.
Okay. So all this time, and to me, this thing with Miss Quincy sounds so interesting, and it also sounds like another perfect example of you being open and being attentive and being aware of the people that are around you and the beauty and the richness of that. Talk to me talk to me a little bit more about that project, because that sounds really interesting.
Yeah. So we did it for 2 years. The first year it was funded by Assisi Foundation. The second year was funded by the Kresge Foundation. We started with, I think I interviewed, can't remember how many young people we interviewed, but we started maybe with 4 or 5 girls, and ended, I think, with 7 in the program. And it was a paid opportunity. And so we were paying the young people $15 an hour to learn, for me to teach them an art skill that, focused on something that they wanted to address in community. And the skill that I taught them was screen printing. We, at the end of our time together, we did an exhibition at the CDC, which was its first art exhibition, right? The girls were there. We were screen printing on site. We have, images and things and selling prints. And they, I took them to my studio. We did a lot of art things. And I need to be clear and say, like, they were not and did not consider themselves artists. They were young people in the community, living in that community, that Miss Quincy may have known, right, who needed someone there to support them. That was it. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I'm an artist and this would be great for me. It was like, no, these are young people who live and work in this community, and it was a mentorship in a way. It was an opportunity for us to share space together. And we just so happened to be doing that as art as a vehicle. But it was really about care and community at the root of it, right? And we just used art as a conduit for that. Yeah. So during that time as well, we had one young lady who we lost, right, due to gang violence. And so we had to also, be with that. And it was a very difficult time because many of the young people in the space, this was like the third person that they had lost their age within that year, right? And it was April. And that, like, I was like, what are we doing? Like, why does this even matter if they just go back into the environment by which they, So, navigating that with them and in that with them was difficult. It was very difficult. And that was like, I want to say 2015. Let me take a step back. Timestamps. More like 2016, 2017. Something like that. Yeah.
And then talk to me a little bit about what's happening in the studio. Because, I mean, to me, the thing that's really interesting about you is that you, to me, it seems like you have the same kind of studio ethos that you carry with you in the world, in that you are in the studio and that you work, and then there's a kind of like underlying theme or underlying concern, but you're just as open, just as attentive, receptive to the things that are happening in the studio as you are into the real world. Talk to me a little bit about what's happening in the studio at the time.
Mm-hmm. At the time, I'm making leather goods, and I'm sewing those things by hand. I'm still doing that, and I'm still sewing portraits. I feel like it wasn't until after I had Hendrix where I moved into collage more deeply. And it wasn't until during my time pregnant with Hendrix that I moved back into latch hooking. But my studio practice, and it even changed. I forgot to mention this, but like when I graduated college, Jamond and I, this was like 2013, we did a show on Broad. And it was the first time we ever collaborated together. And so he painted on canvas and I was beading on the canvas with these seed beads. And that was like 2013, which is also when I first met Nat, I was still beading. He was like, "What are you doing?" Listen. And I'm like, trying to figure it out. Yeah. Right. And so, yeah, even that, like this idea of like me, trying things and exploring them and trying to figure them out has just been, I think, a part of my journey too. So my art practice at the time was more so around the leather and the sewing on canvas. Yep.
Now, you mentioned Jamon. I'm curious what kinds of things, I mean, last time I remember I asked you about what it was like to date an artist, be married to an artist, be a parent, co-parent with an artist. So in terms of thinking about that, I'm super curious about how what's happening in his practice, in his career, is filtering through. Obviously, there's a great connection, but I'm interested too in what's happening there and how you guys navigate that together.
So Jamon was always like 10 steps ahead of me. When we met, he was illustrating a book. And I was like, "What are you doing?" And I was contemplating whether or not I was going back to college because I had taken a break. So at that particular time, he was really building his public art portfolio. So he was deep into mural making during that time. And even if I take a step back, right, if I look at it from me graduating in 2013 And what he was creating, he was a portraiture artist and a live painter. So he would set up shop in Starbucks and just paint. And he made Starbucks his studio. And so people would come in and order drinks and watch him paint. And he would get clients that way. So he was doing that. But he was also painting live at like poetry sets. And so people would read poetry and he would paint live. And he was doing that. And then he was, illustrating a book. Right. And so he moved from portraiture and live painting. And he still does both of those things. But he wanted to grow his practice and get larger. And he got into mural making in that way. And has really kind of been in that lane for the past few years, for sure, several years. And so when I think about where I was, you mentioned like during that time, during the apprenticeship, which was like 2016, 2017, he was making murals.
Which of course has its own kinds of connections to community. Is this also something, P.S. I totally want to get his information from you so that I can have him in here
Yes.
and double check some of these facts. But
Please.
No, but is that kind of community understanding, is that a kind of shared thing, a thing that is like a point of conversation or a point of information between the two of you?
Yeah.
I mean, not to get all like couples therapy on you.
No, it's okay. I think, that's so interesting to even think about it in that way. I feel like, we rarely even talked about how community showed up in our respective work while working. Yeah, I would also say too that, we got married in 2013, and so it's 2016. We were also just trying to figure out who we were as people, in the marriage. And it was challenging. That in and of itself was challenging, and trying to, understand what that meant for us in our relationship, and, how we track and move forward and all that other stuff. So I think on one hand, we were making art, and in a lot of ways it overlapped. But on the other hand, we were also like not talking about it, and we were trying to figure out the marriage. So yeah, but I think now we talk about it a lot more now. It was almost like we needed to figure out our groove as partners. Right? Because even, I mentioned we did that collaborative show together. I was like, this is not gonna work. Like, this is not gonna work. It's not gonna work. Like, yeah. But again, I think it felt like it wasn't gonna work because we had not found our rhythm as partners yet. And I think we were premature in trying to force a collaboration between art making without understanding who we were to each other as partners.
That totally makes sense. Now, to bring us back up to speed, so now the project with Miss Quincy is sort of coming to a close, and that was a 2-year project. P.S. I love how you were just like, we had this grant from the Assisi Foundation and then Kresge, like legit the two most powerful names in all of community funding. Way to go. Okay, so what happens after this project?
Yeah, so during the project, right, during the last year of the project, I have to step away because I'm pregnant and bedridden.
Right.
I'm pregnant and bedridden. So now we're talking 2017. Okay, this is the second year of the program. And I'm in my maybe fourth or fifth month of pregnancy, and I'm bedridden. And so I'm literally trying to also have a different job now, right? I've left Crosstown. I have a different job. I'm trying to maintain my job. I'm trying to maintain the requirements of this work and the grant. And I'm having complications with my pregnancy. And I remember being on the phone with Miss Quincy, like, I'm going to try to find somebody who can replace me. But it was also one of those things, too, where it's like we kind of like birthed this thing together. And so I'm already not there to even be able to train somebody. But also the girls have a relationship with me. It was just it was timing of the thing just didn't do well. And I also believe, too, that's why the program probably dissolved, because I wasn't there. It also taught me, too, that, like, if I'm going to create a program, create one that doesn't require me. Like, create it to where it is structurally sound, that if I have to step away, I can, and it can still continue. That was my first lesson in that. And then that taught me how to then grow another program for 7 years of my last job, where it's still going now without me, right? So, but that was a lesson. So in 2017, when I was bedridden, well, it was actually because Hendrix was born in 2018. It was the top of that year. So, I found out I was pregnant in October of 2017, and then, it's 9 months. So part of 1 year, part of another year. But yeah, the program continued as best it could without me. Miss Quincy had pulled in a few other people to help kind of push it along and concluded. And then once it concluded, I helped to kind of write the grant reporting for it and get it closed. And then it dissolved, so to speak. So by that time I was a new mom, and trying to breastfeed.
I feel like there's a part of me that's like, man, if I was in charge, I would totally just like pause this thing, and then we would come back, and then I would be like, okay, so last time we finished up, you were saying breastfeeding. Okay, but let's not do that. So now, but I am super interested.
Okay.
So I am keenly aware of the optics of this as a male identifying person asking a mom what it's like to be an artist and a mom. But this is a question that was particularly important for me as a human being and as an artist, and it's also a question that I ask everyone once they say, I have a kid. I just do it because I'm super fascinated by it, because for me it was such a rich, beautiful thing and complicated. And so I'm curious, and also it's a thing that we just do not talk about in school. Like, it's never a thing where we say, okay, there's health insurance. Now here's how you do that. Here's taxes. This is how you do that. And then here is the possibility of bringing another human being into the world. We never talk about that either. And so I'm curious in terms of, I'm also aware, like I said before, of how wonderful for me you are as a kind of, not as a model, but as a person with whom many people identify, but then also there's this admiration. And so I'm asking you that with all of those things sort of bound up together. How was that processing for you as an individual?
Yeah. So my journey into motherhood and art making, was, I don't even know what to name it as, right? I would say that when I found out I was pregnant, I had a lot of things working at the time, and my studio practice wasn't as pronounced, right? But I also felt like I was being creative in other ways in my work. And so that part of my creativity still was fed, even though I wasn't in my studio every day. And so in 2017, when I found out that I was pregnant, I wasn't in my studio. And I also, it was like rough. Like, I had morning sickness like no other. Like, I was like, what is this kid doing? But I also remember too that I was navigating a very emotional experience as well. in my life. So not only am I carrying a child, I'm also trying to mentally and emotionally balance something that is unfolding in my life that's traumatic, right? And so I think that obviously that had a lot to do with, too, my physical being, which made the pregnancy even harder. And so one day I remember talking to my therapist, and I was talking to her, and I was like, I haven't really made any art, like physically been in my studio making art. And she was like, oh, well, yeah. So we talked a little bit about that. And I was like, I really do think it'll save my life. Like, if I could figure out a way to get back into making my work, I think it'll save me in a lot of ways, because it was just a really dark place. And she was like, you need to think about that. Like, what could you do if you can't go to your studio? Like, what's portable for you? And I started to think about latch hooking, which was the thing that I did, right, in middle school. I started to think I was in the hospital, and like Jamon was bringing me like these coloring books and like things like that. And I just got my little childhood self together and was just like in true bliss, right? And I remember Jamon had brought me a desk in the hospital room, and I was sitting at the desk, and the nurse came in. She was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I think my computer was up, had my coloring stuff out, whatever. And she was like, you have to lay prostrate. You can't be sitting up. And I was like, I can't even sit. She was like, no, ma'am, you need to be back in the bed. Your feet need to be elevated. You cannot sit upright, right? You need to keep that baby in there because it's cooking still. And I was like, geez Louise. Anyway, so I started a little bit of that journey, continued to go through my pregnancy, had a baby. He had surgery the second day of his life because he had some things going on. And I knew this, right? I knew this in my pregnancy, that Hendrix was going to have a procedure that required him to undergo anesthesia. And it would be a bit invasive for his tiny little body. And so, I was in prayer about that, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, first time mom, baby in NICU, dealing with a traumatic experience outside of the pregnancy, right? All these things are just kind of happening. And so, I found my way back to latch hooking, and that inspired when I would check in with my therapist. She would ask me how it's going, and I would say, I'm latch hooking again, and I'm realizing that when I do it, I feel so much better. And so we started to talk about in our journey around like the neuroscience of repetition, and that blew everything up for me. And I went on a journey around like, okay, what does it mean to be repetitious in art making, and what's happening in your brain? And it was like spiraled from there, and I kept doing it. Also during that time, so we're talking like 2018, moving into like the end of 2018, I'm doing this latch hooking work, but now I'm collaging, right? So I left imagery with the sewn pieces, right? And I liked that, but I felt like that there was something more that I wanted to include that I just didn't quite have or nail yet. And that's a lot of the ways in which I work. Like I start something and I know that I want to use it or use the material, but I don't know how to actually get to the vision that I'm trying to get to just yet. Like I'm either missing a skill or some kind of something to get me there, but I don't put it away. I'm just like, I'm coming back to that kind of thing. So I pick up collage because again, I have that archive of Ebony magazines. I'm still interested in imagery. And I tell this story about images. Did I tell that story in the first interview about images and being in my grandmother's living room and picking up the photo album? Anyway, we'll get to that. I think I did. I remember saying that. I remember hearing it back.
I mean, I remember thinking about Deborah Willis's.
Oh, yeah. Picturing
us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, there's a part of my brain that says, hey, Hamlet, you're supposed to ask about the ebony magazines, because there's a part of me that's like, of course you had ebony magazines, but why did you have a big stack of ebony magazines again?
And the ebony magazines that I had were from the like 40s.
Whoa.
Yeah, 30s. I think I have some from the 30s, 40s, 30s through 60s. Got them because I was at work at Crosstown. There was a market that this guy did, who was like a vintage kind of guy. He would resell things. And I went into the space and he had these ebony, and I was like, I didn't care how much they were. I was like, I'll take all of them. And I have since called him like twice. Hey, do you have any more? He's like, no, I've got Life, but I don't have them. Like, if you ever like, continue to call him, right? But that's how I acquired them. It was a market at Crosstown, and he was reselling things.
Okay. So now talk to me a little bit about Hendrix and Hendrix coming home. And so how long were you guys there in the hospital?
He was there for a week, maybe a week and a couple of days.
Wow. And then you guys were able to make the transition back home?
So when I had Hendrix, I couldn't even hold him. So, have the baby. Here's the baby, skin to skin, right? Couldn't even hold him because he had what's called an omphalocele, which means that in the embryo state, at some point, all of our organs are kind of like forming on the outside of our bodies, and then they kind of go into the anyway. So his intestine was outside of his body when he was born, and he also had like a little cyst on his intestine. I hope he's okay with me sharing this. What do you think? He's 6. I'm not sure.
I think it's okay, because I think for me the thing that I'm getting from this is that in the same way that you were talking about the experience with Miss Quincy, and the same way that you were talking about a lot of your other experiences, I mean, I think it really, for me, drives home the point that while you are a person that I really admire, you've also had to really overcome a lot, you know, and being bedridden for 4 months is extraordinary. I mean, of course, this is also probably the part where when I edit this in, I will include all of the horrific, bone-crushing statistics about women of color during their pregnancy in the United States, and how horrible it is, and how everyone needs to pay attention to it, and good Lord, can we fix that right now? Yeah. And then thinking about Hendrix in terms of that struggle and the difficulty, I know for sure that is something that really helps me understand, and I think Hendrix would be okay with it. If Hendrix says no, we can go back in time and edit it. That's totally fine with me. But I feel like
I think he would be okay with it too.
Part of that I think is really important too, because I think for me, when I hear you tell these stories and I hear you being so generous with these stories, is how really important they are, you know, and how not only are they really important, but they're also a key part of how you're making these decisions along the way. Yeah. Which goes into, for me, my goal with this project, which is to think about all of the things that were a factor in you becoming who you are and who you will become. And so thinking about that, I mean, that's a huge difficulty. But how was the process of entering what we might think of as a kind of normalcy in a daily life? How did that play out for you in your practice? And then also, I'm sure, with Jamon and his practice.
Yeah, it was challenging. I feel like, you know, with that journey, and then getting Hendrix home, and even getting to know him as he was unfolding before our eyes, right, and growing, and like all the things. I feel like me making art in what I was making was really, I think, a gesture for me to just like, because that was so new, I'm going to say it this way, because that was so new and so unfamiliar, me making my art felt like the control that I wanted to have over my life. Because I could not control a lot of, and won't ever, right? Won't ever be able to control a lot of how motherhood or parenthood goes, I can try to set up some very specific guardrails, right? But at the end of the day, Hendrix is on a journey, much like I am, right? And so me getting into my studio as often as I could was my way of controlling a little bit of my world that felt a little out of my control. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, big time. I
Okay.
mean, I think for me, one of the ways I'm thinking about that is not just, okay, so we have this child, we're doing this, we're doing that, but also like just in terms of how you navigate, balance all of the things that you're doing. To me, that seems really hopeful and really good. Talk to me a little bit more about some of the things that are happening around this time. So 17, 18.
So 17, 18, I am making the collage latchhook work. I am invited to show at the Young Arts Patrons conference. Do you remember that? Okay. I'm invited to show my work there. I'm also invited by Arts Memphis to be a part of their CSA, at the time, the Community Supported Art. And because that work had to be very small, I don't remember the dimensions, but it was like 4x4 or something like that. I thought, I wanted to do a series of latch hooks, but that would have turned. Always go back to time, right? And I was also still trying to work out in a way, like, oh, how would they hang it? How would we display it? So I decided to go with collage work. And so in the show, I had presented my first collage piece publicly. And I had also had, these very small works that were in the CSA of collage. And yeah, that's what I was making.
Now, talk to me a little bit about the collages. Like you were saying, you make these first collages. It's the first time that you show them. In my brain, I sort of remember what they look like. But will you talk to us a little bit about the imagery and talk to us a little bit about how that transition worked for you? I know that was probably a terrifying thing, being kind of known for a thing. Or was it terrifying? Was it one of those things where you were just so multivalent, you were just like, well, of course I'm going to do some collages?
Yeah, it didn't feel terrifying for me because I always feel like, I don't know, and I never, I guess when I present work, I never really think about like, and maybe this is obviously the reason why my brand was always convoluted, but I never really think about like, oh, does this connect? Or I'm just kind of like, this is a story I need to tell, right? And so I put it out there. I'm learning though that it would be nice if it would connect. But I think at that time, I was so excited of just getting myself back out there that I was like, wow, this is a great opportunity for me. And so the collage work that I was making was, image based. It was mixed media. I had sewn sequins and some latch hook material and tulle and things into the collage. I had painted the solid black background. I, still was doing some of the things that I do now in my collage work. And was excited to present it. And then I went to that show and the work was amazing. There were so many great works in that exhibition. And, I was excited. I was excited to be on this journey. But when I was, thinking about imagery, I was pulling specifically from those Ebony magazines at the time, and then some other like photo-based books and things that I had in my studio. And, thinking about that time and even just tracking my journey with the love of portraiture and images, right? It just reminded me of, again, me looking at the photo albums and being so like enthralled with what I had in my hands. But also too, my mom recently photographed this collage that I made years ago. Like didn't even know, wasn't even thinking about cutting imagery and extracting images in that way. But it just, having this conversation just kind of reminds me that, man, there's so many nuggets along the journey that, and if you just remember that you can like, kind of point out. Anyway.
Now I'm interested in PS. We're super close on time. I was looking at it and I was
oh
like,
gosh, we're not even.
How can we slow Brittney down? Because I don't want this to ever end. But now I'm interested in, as someone who's not a collage artist, but is really interested in collage. I'm curious, when you at that point were looking through the Ebony magazines, so much of, for me, collage is really about, obviously, editing, but also about choosing. And so I'm curious, what was it? What were some things that you felt drawn to in terms of that process?
Yeah. So, Black men, young Black boys, children, right, were my go-tos. And it wasn't like I opened up the Ebony magazine and I was like, I'm looking for men. It was, I open up a magazine and I see a man, or I see a young boy, or I see young people, and I'm there. That's even still the case today, right? So I, in the collage work at the time, I was really kind of focused on that type of imagery. And I was also like kind of tiptoeing and peeling back the layers of this idea of what men meant to me, right? Because again, recognizing that the relationship with my father was non-existent, yet I have a relationship with a man in my home, and I'm trying to figure that out, right? And I'm trying to make the connections between why this is so difficult for me. And so, I think I was naturally kind of gravitating to that type of imagery. But also too, just to flip through an Ebony magazine and like read the pages and like feel just the radiation of like culture and like remembrance and memory from some of those things. And obviously I wasn't around in the 60s, but to know that like I can flip a page and see an article written and be able to harken back to a historical moment about that article, there was something very powerful and special about that for me.
Now, I mean, one thing I'm also sort of struck by is knowing you, I know that there is a huge stack of books, and I know that you also have like, there's my alarm that says, Hamlet, you got to stop. But, and this might not necessarily be a thing for today, but I'm interested in, you're so porous and you're so absorbent and you're so curious. I would imagine like you have 1,000 things cooking, and then here you go, you open the Ebony magazine and it's like, oh, here's this historical wormhole or deep dive that's possible, and then you turn the page and then like, oh my goodness, there's another 18 things that I can research. Like, is there a part of your brain that has to like turn that stuff off so that you can just be like, wow, look at that image, and you're only in the land of the image? Like, how does that work for you? Or are you just a person who just has a list of 1,000 things you need to research?
No, I have to turn it off at a certain point. I think that I do have a list of 1,000 things that I'm interested in, but I also believe too that if I'm not careful, it could be too, like it'll be too ambiguous, right? It becomes too nebulous. Is that the word I'm looking for, right? It just becomes too much, and then that could turn into overwhelm. And so, although I have a lot of interest, I do, it's important to me to find the through line between the things, because that helps to keep me grounded. So although I have a lot of interest in things, doesn't mean that I need to pursue them. It just means that I have a lot of interest, right? And so it's my responsibility as an artist to quiet myself down enough to understand the connections, right? And what's the personal connection here? What's the art historical connection here, right? What's the global connection here? And Derek helped me to think about that too. And just like how this comes to fruition, right? And if you quiet yourself down enough, like even in this conversation, these two conversations that we've had, I've been able to make those connections, right, throughout time and space. And when I do that, I'm honoring my journey, and that's what I want to do, right?
That's like it's like you were ready. This is how I'm going to end it, Hamlet. And that was the second of 3 interviews that I did with Brittney Boyd Bullock. That interview was recorded on January 29th, 2025. Please join us next week when we have the third of 3 interviews that I did with Brittney Boyd Bullock. Until then, thank you for listening.